Okay, this is part 3, material design and other cool stuff for the Flickr browser, video 6. The saga continues. Let's keep going. Okay, so let's go back to MainActivity. We just need to add a little bit of code so that if the menu icon, the search icon we created is clicked, that it invokes the intent that we've just created and invokes the code in search activity. So I'm in here now in on options item selected. I'm going to do a search for, or do a check if ID is equal to r.id.menu_search. If I've selected that menu option, we're going to type intent equals new intent, this, and it'll be search activity.class. So that's going to be the functionality or the class that's invoked. Then we need to do a start activity for that intent and return true because we successfully processed the menu option, so we don't want the system to try and process it again. So now we should be able to run this, and even though it's not fully configured, we should be able to see the search in operation at least. Just waiting for it to compile. Okay, we're just going to run it on our Lollipop device for now. Okay, we've got the standard things coming in. We can click on search now, and you can see we've now got that automatically coming up. So you notice the enter photo tags, that's what we entered in the searchable.xml file. So you can see that the search service has successfully read that XML file, and we've got the icon that we've added, and also it's got the text and it's ready to be typed. So we can just start typing in there and it's going to accept the input. Notice how the little cursor is pink. That's using the extra color, the highlight color that we selected in our XML file, and also the underline is that color as well. And also notice the back arrow. So we can click on back to go back to our other screen. But also if we type, press enter. In this case I pressed enter, but that's sort of closing off the input, and that's also gone back to the other screen because obviously I'm on a virtual device. So basically we'll be able to type whatever we want, and if we select done which on the virtual keyboard, it will go back to the other screen automatically with our data. So the next thing we need to do now that that's working is we need to go back to our search activity. Sorry, go back to our main activity, and we need to sort of read the input that we've got back from the search activity that we've recorded. So that's this code. So you can see this code here, we've actually stored what the user has typed in. So at this stage it's only stored, so we need to go back to main activity and sort of retrieve that data and then start processing it, and in actual fact, create a query out of it to query the Flickr database. But that brings up an interesting concept because we need to think now, going back to main activity, where would we call that code? How do we know when that search activity has finished processing and the processing has come back to the main activity? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing that, and the concept that we're going to talk about briefly now is the life cycle of an app, or particularly in this case of an activity. So in this case, when we start the main activity for the first time, what happens is it goes through and executes the process called onCreate, and it does all this processing. And that's pretty standard. We've done that a number of times now. But there's also other processes that are automatically called depending on the state of the app. And the one that we're about to add is called onResume. So resume, as the name implies, is called automatically whenever an app is resumed. And that's what's going to happen here. Sorry, I'm saying app, whenever an activity is resumed. So the concept is main activity is created, and it brings up the screen as you saw with our recycler view. Once you click on the search icon, and then it actually goes to that other screen into search activity, this is automatically, main activity is put into the background. And what we're going to do is after the search activity is invoked, after that closes off and comes back to main activity, it doesn't necessarily run the onCreate again. It will, depending on which button you press, but we'll talk more about that later. But what it will always do is run the onResume. So what we want to do is put some functionality in the onResume class, not in the onCreate, so that we can process what we've got back from the searchable information and then put that in our Flickr app to query that data. So how do we do that? Well, we need to create a method called onResume. And just to be clear here also, you never have to worry about onResume being run before onCreate. OnCreate will always be executed before. So that's good. That's very useful for us because we will know things like we will know that, for example, our recycler view has already been set up, and we can assume certain things have happened. There's been some basic initialization that has occurred before we create our onResume. That's very important because something you do need to think about in that life cycle of an app, or in an activity in this case, is the state of variables. Have they been initialized? Is your data ready? Those types of things. So we do know that onCreate is always executed before onResume. And onResume obviously is only really ever, well, it's interesting because onResume is called when we're coming back, in this case from the search activity, but also onResume is also executed automatically when the activity is created. That's just the way the life cycle works. I'm going to do a separate video about this and talk more in detail about exactly which processes are actually invoked. But essentially, onCreate is always executed when the activity is created, but onResume is also executed after that as well. And likewise, when you're coming back from another screen, if onCreate isn't called because it's already in the background, onResume still will be. Anyway, I'm hoping I'm not making that too confusing, but I think if we go through and do an example, it'll make a lot more sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to override the onResume functionality. So I'm just going to do a Control-O. We're going to go to onResume. You can see all these other processes: on stop, on destroy. So you can call things, just before we go too much further, you can call things like just before an activity is closing down, you could perhaps close a database or do something like that. And anyway, we'll get into that into another video. But the one we want now is onResume. Just going to type it, onResume. There we go, that one there, onResume. Okay, so first things first, we do want to do a super.onResume, so we execute the system processes, whatever they are. So now what we need to do is do a few checks, and this brings up another interesting point here, in that the Flickr recycler view adapter is only initialized on post execute. So if you recall, going back up here to our onCreate, we've set up and looked for the recycler view. We've set a layout manager, but of course it's the process in Photos in our async task that actually initializes the adapter. Now we're going to change that in a future video so that functionality isn't there. But right now, what we have to do is we have to put a test in there to test whether that's null, and only try and execute the code if the Flickr recycler view adapter is not null. Bearing in mind again that any time this activity is created, it's also going to call an onResume. So this onResume is not only called when we're coming back from search activity, it's also called at the time the main activity is invoked for the first time. So to do that, we're going to put if Flickr view adapter is not equal to null. So we're going to process, then we're going to assume, we're going to look at our shared preferences. Shared pref equals preference manager, just very similar to what we did before on the other screen, on the search screen. Get default shared, and then we do context, get application context. So again, we're going to do exactly the same thing. These are just basically shared preferences, for want of a better term, that are only used for our app. And we're going to put string query equals get saved preference data Flickr query. We haven't written that function yet. We're going to write that shortly. Then we're going to do a test to say if query.length is greater than 0. In other words, if they did type something on the previous screen, we're going to do a process photos query true, which you've seen that code before, and we're going to do a process photos.execute. Now we are going to change the structure in a future video, but right now this is the way we're going to process it. So we're essentially checking here, making sure the adapter isn't null, and if it isn't null, we're going to retrieve the Flickr query And remember, that's what we saved in the search screen. We saved that, going back to search activity. That's this code here. So when they submitted their entry on the search, when they typed in their search parameters and pressed enter basically, or they clicked on done if you're using a virtual keyboard, we saved that into a variable called Flickr query, and we then returned back to the main screen, so the main activity I should say. So now what we're doing is here, we're actually retrieving that. We're getting whatever they typed basically. We're putting that into a string called query, and if there's something there, we're going to reprocess our async task, which will go back to Flickr, passing the parameters that were typed. So we now need to just write that other function. And we're just going to do it this way, because we're going to be using this in two places. Preference data, and that accepts the key, and that's the key name effectively for our private preferences. And actually that shouldn't have been in there. That should have been in here, as we're using a method to do that. And then what we're going to do, return shared pref dot get whatever the string was that passed, and double quotes. So what that get string I should say, because we need to indicate the type that we've stored it as, which we know is a string from the previous screen. And I didn't put a parameter in there. We're returning a string. So just out of interest, you might be wondering, well, shouldn't we be checking for null to make sure there is a key there? Well, the good thing about this function here, .getString key, comma, double quotes, is if the key doesn't exist, it's going to return an empty string. Otherwise, it's going to return whatever the contents of the string were. So in other words, it's always going to return something, whether that's like an empty string or the actual contents of the query. So again, we are going to change this right now. We're setting the adapter every time we call this task, which is very inefficient, but it will work for this process now. We are going to change that in a future video. So if we run this, we should be able to do a query, and whatever we type, we should be able to see the results on the screen in our search. So I'm just going to use the lollipop one for now, and just tab back over to that. Always select the wrong one. Okay, so now we've got a generic search there. So I'm going to type in a search, and let's just try typing in Android lollipop and put commas to separate the two. Press enter. And you can see the search has now been updated. We've got lollipop specific functionality for our search words, and let's just try something else. Red truck. Okay, so that you can see that's working quite nicely. We've got our query working. So let's just make a little bit of a change now. Let's just change this color. Let's maybe make that our secondary color, make it a yellow, so that looks a little bit nicer on the screen. And we might do something with these margins. I think we need to add a little bit of padding there to the left, and a bit of a gap from when the first photo starts in between the bottom of the toolbar. So we're going to go and do that before we end this video. You need to go into project and go into our browse.xml. And that's, of course, the XML for our basic sort of recycler view screen. So at the moment, we've got some padding. First things first, let's add some text. I'm going to put Android text color. And I can put a color directly in here. I can create a separate style, or for things, sometimes if there's only one thing you want to change, it can be just as easy to put it in here like this, secondary text color. Like so, and again, you get the confirmation to the left-hand side there of what color it's going to be. So I want to add some padding. Okay, so let's change this padding. We'll be a bit more specific. We'll put padding left, and we'll make it, say, 10 dp. And we'll do padding right. Also make that 10 dp. And we'll put a padding bottom of 10 dp. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, and I think I put bottom, and I should have put top there. Probably technically more correct to put a margin there instead of a padding. Okay, we've got that working there. We've got a bit of a gap there. We've got 10 dp to the left, to the top, which is the top of our layout, of course, which of course is at the bottom of the toolbar. We've now got more space to the left-hand side here, and we've actually got space which we can't see on the right-hand side as well. And also we changed the color to yellow, so that's a little bit nicer and a bit more in theme with what we've come up with. All right, we're going to end the video here. In the next video, we're going to talk about fixing up that adapter design so that it's not sort of trying to set the adapter each time we redo our Flickr query. We're going to basically set up the adapter once and not every time. And we're just going to do some other sort of general code cleanup. So I'll see you in that next video.